Carlos Alcaraz called the ATP rules shit on court. Everyone heard it. The umpire shut him down. Twitter went crazy. And when he was asked about it after the match, instead of walking it back or apologizing or giving some PR-friendly non-answer, he did something most athletes would never do. He doubled down hard and demanded the ATP change its rules. Let's be clear about what happened first, because the context matters. This wasn't Alcaraz having a bad day and taking it out on an umpire. This wasn't some petty complaint about a close line call or a questionable overrule. This was a fundamental disagreement about a rule he believes is broken. The moment came at 4-4 in the first set against Karen Khachanov. They'd just finished an exhausting rally. One of those points where both players are running corner to corner, defending shots that should be winners, somehow getting balls back that have no business coming back. The kind of point that has the crowd on their feet. Alcaraz finished it at the net with a delicate drop shot. Beautiful tennis. He celebrated briefly, then jogged to his towel. Standard procedure. You win a brutal point, you're sweating, you need to dry your hands before serving. Every player does this hundreds of times per tournament. It's part of tennis. It's part of managing the physical demands of the sport. But chair umpire Maria Sikak saw it differently. She gave Alcaraz a time violation warning. And that's when things got interesting. "I'm not allowed to go to the towel?" Alcaraz asked, the disbelief clear in his voice. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation. Because the implication of the time violation was exactly that. You're not allowed to take time for your towel after a demanding point, or at least not without risking a penalty. Sikak explained her reasoning. "I stopped the time." "I did. I stopped time at 25 seconds when it started. Then you got the towel. Then I started the clock again." So here's what she's saying. She stopped the serve clock when Alcaraz first moved toward his towel. But then she restarted it while he was still at the towel and walking back to the baseline. Which means the clock was running while he was actually using the towel and preparing to serve. And because all of that took longer than the remaining time on the clock, he got hit with a violation. From Sikak's perspective, she was being generous. She stopped the clock to give Alcaraz extra time to reach his towel. But from Alcaraz's perspective, she was creating an impossible situation. Because if the clock restarts while you're at the towel, then you don't actually have time to use the towel properly. You're being penalized for doing something the sport requires you to do. "So I'm not allowed to go to the towel," Alcaraz repeated. "I'm not allowed." The frustration in his voice was palpable. This wasn't the first time he'd dealt with time violations. This is a recurring issue for him, getting penalized for taking reasonable time after physically demanding points. And he was done pretending it was fine. Sikak tried to explain again. "Carlos, I stopped it till you reached there. I stopped it at 25 seconds, till you actually reached the towel." But that just proved Alcaraz's point. If the clock only stops until you reach the towel, but immediately restarts while you're using it, then you functionally don't have time for the towel. The entire purpose, drying your hands, taking a breath, resetting mentally, is negated by the clock running the whole time you're doing those things. "I can't cancel it," Sikak said finally. The violation stood. There was nothing more to discuss. Except Alcaraz wasn't done discussing it. At the next changeover, when he sat down in his chair, he made his feelings abundantly clear. "The ATP rules are always shit," Alcaraz said, his voice picked up by the courtside microphones. "They're shit." Sikak responded immediately. "Okay. Well, I think we got the point." That exchange, the world number one calling the ATP rules shit twice, and the umpire politely but firmly shutting down the conversation, captured everything about this controversy. Raw frustration from a player who believes the system is broken. Strict enforcement from an official who's just doing her job according to the rules she's been given. Now here's where most athletes would handle things differently. After the match, after they've had time to cool down and think about the optics, they usually walk back their on-court comments. They say something like, "I was frustrated in the moment, but I respect the officials and the rules." They do damage control. They apologize for the language, even if they stand by the substance. Carlos Alcaraz did not do that. When asked about the incident in his post-match press conference, he immediately went on the offensive. Not against the umpire personally. He didn't attack Sikak, but against the rule itself and the system that created it. "Honestly, I think the time rule is absurd," Alcaraz said. "No hedging. No diplomatic softening. Just straight truth. After a very demanding point, finishing at the net, sprinting to my towel, I practically had no time left. She told me she stopped the clock when I was on my towel, But from then until I called for the balls and prepared to serve, I had no time to spare. To me, that makes no sense. That's the technical explanation of why the rule is broken. The 25-second window isn't actually 25 seconds of usable time when you factor in the distance to the towel, the time to use it, the walk back to the baseline, and the preparation to serve. By the time you've done all those things, all of which are necessary and expected, the time is gone. But Alcaraz didn't stop there. He added another layer to his argument, pointing out a contradiction in the rule's application. Besides, the crowd was still shouting and cheering, which also causes delays. I looked at the clock when there were 3 or 4 seconds left, and I didn't have enough time to serve, but she still gave me a warning. This is crucial, because tennis etiquette and rules require players to wait for reasonable quiet before serving. You can't serve while thousands of people are still screaming from the previous point. But apparently, the serve clock doesn't pause for crowd noise. So players are caught in an impossible bind. The clock says serve now, but the circumstances don't allow it, and they get penalized for following proper etiquette instead of rushing their serve into chaos. That's not a rule serving its intended purpose. That's a rule working against itself. And Alcaraz called it out directly. Personally, I think there should be a bit more leniency, even a reconsideration of the rule, because in such tough matches, the same thing always happens, and to me, it's ridiculous. There's that word, ridiculous. Not unfortunate, or challenging, or some other diplomatic term. Ridiculous. As in, this makes no sense and shouldn't exist in its current form. As in, anyone with basic understanding of tennis should see this is broken. But the most powerful part of Alcaraz's defense came when he connected the rule to the ATP's broader goals and exposed a fundamental contradiction in their strategy. Tennis is also about entertainment, Alcaraz explained. The ATP says it wants to attract more people, to broaden its audience. If they don't allow us time to recover between points to offer the best possible level, everything goes too fast, and it's difficult to engage the crowd. This is the argument that should terrify ATP leadership. Because he's saying, your rule contradicts your stated mission. You claim you want to grow the sport and attract casual fans, but you're implementing policies that degrade the quality of tennis, which is the exact thing that attracts fans in the first place. Nobody watches tennis because the matches are slightly shorter than they used to be. People watch because the tennis is spectacular, because the rallies are incredible, because the shot making is superhuman, because the drama and tension make them feel something. And you don't get spectacular tennis when players are rushed between points after brutal rallies. You get sloppier tennis, more errors, less risk-taking, because players don't have the physical or mental capacity to execute complex patterns. The product becomes less entertaining in pursuit of efficiency that nobody asked for. Alcaraz spelled this out explicitly. I think the umpires should be more flexible or, better yet, add a few more seconds to the clock. With a little more leeway, we can prepare better to put on a show on every point. That's his solution. Not radical. Not demanding unlimited time. Just add a few seconds to account for the physical reality of modern tennis, or give umpires clear discretion to extend time after particularly demanding points. Let players recover adequately, so they can produce the tennis that makes the sport valuable. But here's the key. Alcaraz isn't just complaining for himself. He explicitly mentioned that many other players feel the same way, but don't speak up as loudly. Yes, I think many players feel the same way. Some are faster, and others have slightly slower routines. I try to adapt as much as possible, and in many matches, I know I have to respect the time, so I change my routine. This is important because it shows he's trying to work within the system. He's modifying his routine. He's bouncing the ball fewer times. He's trying to speed things up. But even when doing all of that, he's still finding situations where the time limit is impossible to meet through no fault of his own. That's not a player problem. That's a rule problem. And Alcaraz is saying so publicly, using his platform as world number one to advocate for change that would benefit everyone. The really interesting thing is what happened during the match itself. According to multiple reports, Karen Khachanov, Alcaraz's opponent, the guy who benefits from Alcaraz getting a time violation, actually stepped in and asked the umpire if she could overturn the call. Think about that. Your opponent, who you're trying to beat, who's currently ahead in the set, asks the official to cancel a penalty against you because it seems that unfair. That tells you everything about how arbitrary the call felt in the moment. Khachanov recognized what everyone watching could see. Alcaraz had just won a brutal point at the net, and needed a reasonable amount of time to towel off and prepare. There was nothing slow or stalling about his routine. He was just trying to do the basic things every player does between points. And getting penalized for it felt wrong. But Sikak couldn't overturn it. The rules don't give umpires that discretion once a violation is called. It's on the books and it stays there. That rigidity is part of what Alcaraz is pushing back against. The system doesn't allow for common-sense adjustments when circumstances clearly warrant them. The umpire is locked into enforcing the rule as written, even when doing so creates an unfair outcome. Now let's talk about the umpire herself, because there's relevant context here. Maria Sikak is one of the most experienced officials in tennis. She's highly respected. She's also known for being strict with time violations. On the WTA Tour, where she usually works, players know not to test her on this issue. Andrea Petkovic, the former world number 9, actually issued a warning to Alcaraz after the match. She's mostly chair umpired on the WTA side. We all know how strict she is. You don't want to get into an argument with her. She will destroy you mentally and emotionally. Petkovic wasn't criticizing Sikak. She was just stating a known fact. Sikak enforces rules strictly. She doesn't give players much leeway. And if you argue with her, you're not likely to win. But that's exactly why this incident is revealing. Because it's not about one umpire being unreasonable. Sikak was following the rules as written. The problem is the rules themselves. They create situations where strict enforcement leads to outcomes that feel unfair to everyone involved. Players, opponents, fans watching. Alcaraz's willingness to call this out publicly, to use words like absurd and ridiculous, to not back down in the press conference, to double down on his on-court profanity, that takes real courage. Because he's challenging the establishment. He's saying the people who run tennis have created a bad rule. That's not comfortable. That's not safe. That's putting himself out there as a potential target for criticism or sanctions. But he's doing it anyway because he genuinely believes the rule is wrong and needs to change. There's also historical context worth noting. This isn't Alcaraz's first clash with time violation rules. At the 2024 Japan Open final against Taylor Fritz, he yelled at chair umpire Fergus Murphy, saying, "You have never played tennis in your life." It was harsh, arguably too personal, but it revealed the same underlying frustration. Officials who've never experienced the physical reality of professional tennis are enforcing rules that don't account for that reality. Multiple other top players have had similar issues. Rafael Nadal dealt with time violations throughout his career despite having one of the most meticulous and consistent routines in tennis. Novak Djokovic has been penalized. Stefanos Tsitsipas and Daniil Medvedev have complained publicly about improper violations. This isn't a few players being slow or difficult. This is a systemic issue where the rule doesn't match the actual demands of the sport. And the fact that it keeps coming up with different players and different officials suggests the problem is the policy, not the enforcement. The ATP's response to this controversy will be fascinating, because they're in a difficult spot. On one hand, they've invested in these pace-of-play rules as part of their strategy to modernize the sport and appeal to younger audiences with shorter attention spans. On the other hand, their biggest star is publicly saying those rules are counterproductive and hurt the product. Ignoring Alcaraz is risky. He's not just another player. He's the world number 1. He just completed the career Grand Slam at 22. He's the face of tennis's future. He's the player casual fans come to watch. When he says the rules are broken and need to change, that carries enormous weight. Moreover, his argument is compelling on the merits. The contradiction he identified. ATP says they want to grow tennis while implementing rules that degrade tennis quality, is real and difficult to defend. Tennis executives will struggle to explain why rushing players between points serves any legitimate goal if it results in worse tennis. The business case actually supports Alcaraz's position. Tennis makes money from being entertaining. Sponsors pay premium rates to associate with compelling tennis. Broadcasters pay huge rights fees for matches that deliver drama and quality. Fans buy expensive tickets to see the best players perform at their peak. If time rules are degrading match quality because players can't recover adequately, that undermines all of those revenue streams. The short-term gain of slightly faster matches doesn't offset the long-term cost of less compelling tennis. There's also the player safety argument. When players don't have adequate recovery time, they're more susceptible to injury. Serving before you're physically ready increases risk of muscle strains. Mental fatigue from inadequate rest between points leads to poor movement decisions that cause injuries. The ATP has made player health a stated priority. But the time rule works directly against that priority by forcing players to serve before they're ready. That's a contradiction the ATP will have to address at some point, probably when a high-profile injury happens in circumstances where inadequate recovery time was a contributing factor. What makes Alcaraz's stance particularly interesting is his framing of the issue around entertainment value and fan experience. He's not arguing purely from self-interest. This rule hurts me personally, so change it. He's arguing that the rule hurts tennis broadly by degrading the product fans pay to see. That's a strategic argument. It positions his complaint as being about the health of the sport rather than personal convenience. It makes it harder for critics to dismiss him as just another entitled athlete who doesn't want to follow rules. And the substance of the argument is sound. Casual fans don't care about match length in absolute terms. They care about whether the tennis is exciting enough to hold their attention. A 3-hour match of spectacular tennis is infinitely more valuable than a 2-hour match of mediocre tennis, where players are making errors because they're too rushed to execute properly. The ATP's apparent belief that shorter automatically equals better is contradicted by viewing data. The most watched matches in tennis history are often the longest ones. 5-hour epics between Nadal and Djokovic. Federer-Nadal finals that go deep into fifth sets. These matches succeed despite their length because the quality is so high that fans stay engaged throughout. Alcaraz understands this intuitively. He knows what makes tennis compelling. And he's telling the ATP, your priorities are wrong. You're optimizing for the wrong metric. You're making decisions that hurt the sport in pursuit of goals that don't actually serve anyone's interests. The question is whether ATP leadership has the wisdom to listen, to acknowledge that their current approach might not be working, to recognize that their biggest star is offering constructive criticism that could genuinely improve the sport. Or will they dismiss his concerns? Hide behind rules are rules, without examining whether the rules themselves make sense? Prioritize administrative convenience over product quality? Those choices will reveal a lot about the ATP's values and vision for tennis's future. Because this is a test. The face of the sport is saying plainly that their policies are broken. How they respond will either demonstrate commitment to continuous improvement or reveal institutional rigidity that can't adapt even when presented with compelling reasons to do so. Alcaraz clearly isn't backing down. His post-match comments weren't heat of the moment venting that he'll later regret. This is a position he's thought through. He's articulated specific problems, explained their consequences, and proposed concrete solutions. That's advocacy. That's leadership. He's speaking for all the players who face these impossible situations, but don't have his platform or willingness to speak publicly. He's advocating for fans who want to see the best possible tennis. He's pushing for a sport that prioritizes quality over arbitrary efficiency metrics. The profanity on court, calling the rules shit, might have been emotional, but the substance of his argument is measured, logical, and devastating. He's not wrong that the rule is absurd. He's not wrong that it contradicts the ATP's stated goals. He's not wrong that adding a few seconds or giving umpires more discretion would solve the problem. Every stakeholder benefits if the ATP implements his suggestions. Players can perform at higher levels. Fans get more entertaining tennis. The sport becomes more attractive to casual viewers. Commercial value increases. Competitive integrity is enhanced. Player safety improves. The only thing that loses is institutional inertia, the tendency to keep doing things the way they've always been done because change is uncomfortable. But great sports evolve. They adapt. They listen when athletes identify problems and propose solutions. They recognize that rules should serve the sport, not the other way around. Carlos Alcaraz has told the ATP exactly what's wrong and exactly how to fix it. He's used his platform to advocate for change that would make tennis better. And he's not apologizing for the blunt language he used to get their attention. Now we wait to see if anyone with power actually listens. Because the world number one just said the rules are shit, called them absurd and ridiculous, and demanded change. That's not background noise. That's a direct challenge to tennis leadership from the sport's biggest star. The ball is in the ATP's court. Time to see what they do with it.